recording on Teams as well, and it's 11 a.m. here. If you're ready, we can start. Shall we?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Okay, then. Let me share my presentation here. Then, Michael, when you start, you will need to share yours again. Okay?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. I hope you can see my presentation.
Yes.
Okay. Hi everyone, it's 11 a.m. in Turkey and it's 8 a.m. in UK and 7 a.m. in Australia. Today, Professor Michael Draper from UK and Associate Professor Anne Rogerson from Australia, they are joining us as our honorary guest. First of all, I'd like to thank them both for agreeing to join us today with this session. Today, we will be talking about pedagogical implications and suggestions for further research. This is Academic Integrity Policies course, and this is the final lecturing week. So it's going to be a final session and a wrap-up session. Therefore, before we start our discussion, our lecture today, I'd like to briefly introduce what we are supposed to be doing here today. Before we talk about our studies, I'd like to introduce our honorary guests to you, Michael Drapper and Anne Rogerson. They have quite a lot of experience in the field of academic integrity, especially related to prevention of contract cheating and legislation issues. Therefore, especially with regards to legislation, what actions should be taken into consideration, we are going to refer to their experiences within this regard. Okay, let's start with Michael, with you. Michael is joining us from Swansea University in United Kingdom from School of Law, and he's a professor of legal education there at his institution. He's legally experienced in property law, equity and trust, and company law. And when we check his educational background, we see that he holds degree from Manchester University, Bristol University, and several awards followed this. He's also representing a law society with reference to several committees. When we check his academic background, we see that first he joined the national firm on solicitors as a commercial property lawyer, and then he acted for significant public and private organizations. We see that he's a member of advisory groups on ethics and integrity. I know that he's also contributing as an expert to ethics, transparency, and integrity in education Ethinet platform that we know very well for Council of Europe. And he's also a member of European Network for Academic Integrity Outreach Committee. And he's also acting as a director of the Swansea Academy for Inclusivity and Learner Success and Dean Regulation and Students Cases at his institution. As you know, as you see, he's quite experienced with reference to law and legislation. Here you see a photo that I took when he was on stage last year in Prague. This is from the Ethernet platform, and he was talking about legislation issues there at Council of Europe, and I'm sure today he will refer to some important issues, some key points that he discussed there, because he introduced especially legislation issues in UK, what experiences they have, and what are the challenges involved in this. This is quite important for us. And here you see the presentation slide, his presentation slide there. I hope and I believe that this will be a quite good model for us in terms of designing and regulating our legislation in Turkey. So, most importantly, he will be talking about a legal solution to contract cheating. If you check his CV, his publications, you will see that he has several publications related to this. So, if you're interested in legal issues, this will be a great source for you. Now, I'm moving to our second guest, Associate Professor Anne Rogerson. She is joining us from Australia, University of Wollongong. You know this university because previously we welcomed Zinat here. Zinat is working for University of Wollongong in Dubai, and Anne is working in Australia for University of Wollongong. She is an Associate Dean of Education, and she's working for Faculty of Business and Law there. And she's also, as you see, an expert in law. And when we check her disciplinary expertise, we see that she is specifically interested in management, leadership, and organizational commission. When we check her research expertise, this time we see that she is specifically interested in cheating behaviors, cheating patterns, and how we can detect cheating and how we can promote academic integrity in the community. This is specifically her research interest. She receives a degree from University of Wollongong in Australia from the same unit, and she's holding several positions right now. For example, she is the chair of Academic Integrity Advisory Group. She is the chair of, again, Asia Pacific Forum for Educational Integrity, and she is on the editorial board of International Journal for Educational Integrity. And I just realized that the journal is recognized as Q1 journal. I hope this is a very good news, Anne. This was just I realized before this session. So congratulations. Congratulations to you all on the board. And she's also on the board of International Center for Academic Integrity that they are publishing on academic integrity with them. She has been reviewing for several journals, so she's also quite experienced in publication. She is also contributing to our network, European Network for Academic Integrity, as a member of the International Scientific Panel. And she is also acting as the Executive Advisory Board member for the Center for Academic Integrity that Zinat established in Dubai. And when we check her academic career, we see that she joined University of Wollongong in 2008. Before this, she was working for aviation management and human resources. And after she joined the university, she started to be interested in academic misconduct and later turned this to academic integrity. So she's successfully combining academic misconduct studies with the promotion of academic integrity. And she was awarded with several backgrounds. For example, she was recognized as an international expert right now related to detecting contract cheating. and the use of Turnitin text matching software, machine-based plagiarism, and bibliographic forensics. Her work was cited by the Australian government authorities as the best practice. We will going to touch this issue. Here you see some of her key relevant publications. I'm sure these publications will also show us how to approach to contract cheating and also the other academic misconduct, the other types of academic misconduct in terms of promoting academic integrity. More importantly, I'd like to refer to a good practice note that she is referring here. This is related to addressing contract cheating to safeguard academic integrity, which was published in 2017 in Australia. The editor was Tracy Bretak, and in our previous weeks, we examined this good practice note, because in this good practice note, we see that Tracy provides 5 important elements for the development of academic integrity policy. So this is quite important for us. And when we see that Australia is one of the few countries which has legislation against contract cheating. So this should be something special for you, and I know that you have a lot contribution for this recognition. So congratulations, and I'm sure we have a lot to learn from your experiences, and I know that you have a good model which was presented in this good practice note, and I have one model as well. So these models, I believe that will help the others in terms of regulating their legislation in terms of promoting academic integrity and preventing any type of academic misconduct. And here you see a lovely photo from last year. Those were the times when people were allowed to travel and come together and enjoy themselves. So we were together with Anne in Vilnius that was the last conference that we had face to face as INAI, and hopefully we will have again soon after the pandemic. Now, when we move to our topic, academic integrity policies, in the previous week, we indicated that there are 3 types of policies. In general, the first type mainly focus on how to detect academic misconduct. The second type focuses on how to react in terms of legislation, for example. And the third types deal with proactive ones. These are the educative ones. And when we check, again, Tracy Bretak, she said that policies are going from punitive to educational approach. So as we are studying at Faculty of Education here, we give great importance to pedagogical approaches, and this is what we mean by positive approaches today. Previously, we talked about proactive approaches, pedagogical approaches, and today we are going to relate these positive approaches. Indeed, positive approach is a terminology which is used by Bertram Gallant in the Handbook of Academic Integrity, and she is referring to something similar that we understand from pedagogical or proactive approaches. However, I have some important quotes that might be interesting for us before we discuss our topics here. Let me read the first one. She says that academic integrity must be predicated on attention to institutional integrity. If institutions, institutional leaders, and authority figures fail to model and uphold integrity, then it will always be difficult to ask students to do so. So, act with integrity. If, as a teacher, I do not act with integrity, then I cannot ask my students to act with integrity. If here, for example, as the vice dean, I do not act with integrity, then I cannot ask the other academics to act with integrity. So first of all, we need to provide models to our students or to the other academics or to the society before asking them to do. Therefore, this is quite important in terms of developing academic integrity policies. In the previous weeks, we talked about developing academic integrity culture. And today I'm going to once again touch this issue. And this is quite important in terms of ethical infrastructures. Now, this is going to be related to curriculum development as the ones involved in educational integrity. We know very well that curriculum development is very important, and here I'm going to refer to once again to Bertram Gallant. She's saying that pedagogical methods, curriculum and assessments must be designed to facilitate and measure learning, not to stop cheating, make teaching more efficient, and increase student enrollment. So indeed, sometimes people ask me how to prevent plagiarism, for example. Some teacher ask me some tips in terms of preventing plagiarism, in terms of preventing contract cheating. However, they have such misconception that they would prevent plagiarism without any efforts. This is not possible. As teachers, first, as previously said, we need to become good models, and we need to do our best in terms of helping our students to develop their skills. For example, if we want to prevent plagiarism, first of all, we need to teach them how to write effectively, how to cite, and how to blend the other sources in their papers. If we do not teach them, and if we are simply asking them to stop plagiarism, then this wouldn't happen. Here, we can understand the importance of in-service training. In-service training for teachers, this might be K-12 teachers, or in-service training for academics. This was also what we discussed previously. In my university, for example, anyone can become a professor without having any pedagogical certification. And to our understanding, this happens in the same way in many other countries. I mean, if you'd like to become a K-12 teacher, they will be asking you for pedagogical certification. However, if you'd like to become a professor at the university, then they don't ask you. So this is something strange with reference to managing universities. For universities, we also need in-service training, academics training, especially for supervisors, for example. It's quite important to remind them how to supervise students, how to supervise thesis in terms of promoting academic integrity. Here we see a very good model which was provided by Stephens. Again, this is coming from the Handbook of Academic Integrity. And previously we referred to establishing academic integrity culture at the institution. And establishing the culture can be provided only by developing, we said that only by developing good policies, well-developed institutional academic integrity policies. And in this figure, we see how students, teachers, administrators, parents, so all interlocutors here are woven together with reference to individual remediation, context-specific prevention, and school-wide education. So for those who would like to establish, who would like to create culture of integrity at their institution, I would suggest them to check this figure clearly in order to get the impressions. You see the references that I made, that I referred to introduce our guests and to introduce our topic. Now, I'd like to leave the floor to our guests, starting with Michael, please. Michael, hi again, and I'd like to welcome you once again to this session. And I'd like to thank you very much for your invaluable contribution in advance. The stage is yours. We don't hear you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Salim. Sorry, my mute was on mic. Okay. I have PowerPoint slides, so I'll now attempt to share them. If I can find them. Whiteboard, freehand InVision, window. Ah, they've gone. Can you see that?
Not now, but hopefully in a while. Okay, we can see your screen right now.
Right. Okay. Now, can you see that?
We cannot see the presentation, but we see your screen.
Okay.
If you like, I already have your presentation. I can share it and give the control to you, Michael.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. That would be perfect.
Okay. Let me do this, please. You have the control right now, so I cannot do this, unfortunately. If you leave me the control, then I'll be able to do it, Michael.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Just a second, please.
Typical. It worked perfectly before.
Oh, this is Microsoft Teams. This happens. Okay, I'm uploading. It should be there. Do you see it?
Yes, that's it. Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
You can take the control. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Well, thank you for inviting me, Salim. What I'm going to be talking about today is some of the pedagogical implications in relation to academic integrity. And certainly the current conversation in the UK has been around online assessment and the challenges that online assessment brings to academic integrity. As you know, with COVID-19, it has meant that most in-person assessments are not possible, which has meant that institutions have had to move to online assessment. This has meant the developments both within institutions and with quality assurance agencies, specifically the QAA, very prompt guidance as to best practice in academic integrity around online assessment. And towards the end of the presentation, I will be considering areas of further research. And of course, as Salim mentioned, I will also be mentioning the role of the Council of Europe, the SNAD platform in relation to a forthcoming policy framework for the Council, and proposals within the UK for legislation. So that's my introduction. As Salim mentioned, I'm a member of the QAA, the UK's Quality Assurance Agency's Academic Advisory Group. And one of the things we do is produce publications for wider dissemination around the higher education network within the UK. One of those publications which I contributed to was the QAA guidance in assessing with integrity in digital delivery. And this was produced last year now, when we moved to online assessment. And it was a reminder basically to higher education institutions of the need to ensure the security of academic standards within the assessment process. And the reason for that, as I'm sure Salim in previous presentations and Anne will emphasize, is that without quality assurance, without confidence in our assessment process, the cornerstone of our education system falls down. Those that depend upon the integrity of the awards that institutions offer and make to students, namely employers and members of the public, are relying upon us as higher education institutions as gatekeepers to many professions in which the public will be directly involved with our graduates. So it's important that those that do graduate do so with integrity on the basis of ethical behaviours which have led to a genuine award being granted to the particular student. And this particular message, amongst others, was reinforced in this publication, and I've made reference on the slide to that publication should you wish to refer to it later on. Another publication which we produced last year was a toolkit for enhancing quality in a digital environment. Our principal concern here was that students, up until fairly recently, have not been used to online assessment. It occurs within programs not on a consistent basis. It did occur, but not across the board. And what happened last year within the UK is that all assessments, except those that required in-person assessment because of professional qualification requirements, such as medicine, moved online. Now, that presents challenges both to the institutions, but also to students. They will not be familiar or would not have been familiar with an online assessment. And so this will have been challenging to students. It means, of course, that students will feel vulnerable, they will feel anxious. And we know from our research that anxious students under pressure, that's one of the elements that encourages students into the arms of essay mills and other practices which do not contribute towards academic integrity. They seek help from outside, from third parties, for example. So the key message here was that it's important to communicate clearly with the student body, their representatives, the student union, representatives within programs, and of course, students directly through their personal tutoring and academic mentoring system as to what would be required by the change to assessment practice brought on as a result of COVID-19. And as part of this toolkit, we gave best practice guidance, and again, reference to the toolkit is on the slide. Another publication which came out last year, and again, which I contributed to with colleagues, was the QA guidance on contracting to teach in higher education. It was published in June 2019, and this gives best practice guidance across the full range of academic integrity support, including reference to assessment. And one of the things we recommended in the guidance is that, as far as possible, there ought to be a move towards authentic assessment as a way of supporting academic integrity within the assessment process. So we tried to put out a position in which we suggested that high stakes assessment, high stakes end of unit assessment ought to be avoided in favour of smaller stakes assessment throughout a particular module. We felt that would actually help students in terms of their performance, but also encourage academic integrity within that particular assessment process. It's much easier, for example, to go out and outsource your assignment or assessment if it's a one-off assessment at the end of a module, as opposed to assessment which is delivered throughout the module at varying points in that module. It also makes it more expensive from the student's point of view to outsource. So we suggested considering using lower stakes assessment throughout the module as a way of developing student performance and also as a way of ensuring academic integrity and reducing the pressure on students and therefore reducing their anxiety and perhaps their propensity to seek help from a third party. So there's some key issues as a result of a change to online assessment, which HE institutions had to consider. First of all, from a pedagogical point of view, if you move to online assessment, is your assessment still fit for purpose? How best to assess the learning outcomes? Because all assessment is linked to the learning outcomes for a module and indeed to the learning outcomes for a programme. So using an online assessment would not simply mean taking an in-person assessment and delivering it online, giving it to a student electronically. So would the move to online assessments still assess the learning outcomes? As I've already noted, there are legitimate concerns around academic misconduct in relation to online assessment. I know that some colleagues advocated a very short period of time, perhaps 24 hours, in which the assessment ought to be done if it was offered online. Now, of course, the research demonstrates that if you place additional pressure, including time pressure on the student, that might actually encourage them into the arms of third parties and assistance from essay mills. And we do know, of course, that certain mills and certain third-party providers of services, in inverted commas, can do so within a matter of hours. So shortening the period of time in which assessment is to be delivered by students and submitted isn't necessarily going to assist with academic integrity. There are also verification issues, of course. How do you ensure that the person actually taking the online assessment is your student and not somebody else? And so there are issues around student verification. Students, as I previously said, would be very nervous about this move to online assessment. Indeed, a lot of them were, which meant we had to undertake a large degree of consultation with students directly through the academic mentoring and personal tutor system to reassure them, as well as with their representatives. We also had to look at our regulations within institutions to ensure that those regulations actually supported online assessment in the way that we wanted it to do. And within the UK, what we also introduced as part of COVID-19 was a safety net or no detriment policy in relation to our assessment regulations, whereby we reassured students that their mark for their programme would not be less than an average mark calculated until the point that we moved to online assessment. So we produced a safety net by way of reassurance to students as well. We've also had to work with professional bodies because professional bodies will have their own particular requirements around assessment. Quite naturally, they want to secure the academic quality of their programme and also the award given to students. And that has meant that we have had to move, if we move to online assessment, to a system of proctoring assessments, online software which supervises that assessment process. Not used in every single situation, particularly where the professional body requires it, it is used, but that has expense implications for the institution as well. It's not cheap to license this software, for example. So you need to review your assessments to ensure they are still fit for purpose in relation to the learning outcomes and the validation of the programme. You need to review your assessment instructions and your marking protocols to take account of the move to online assessment, and that includes ensuring that those with reasonable adjustments in relation to their learning are taking into account that there's universal design in relation to the assessment that takes into account those reasonable adjustments. And we need to ensure that students understand that what we're doing in online assessment is not assessing their technology skills. We are still assessing the learning outcomes for the module. Students do need that reassurance. So that means clear communication with students, making sure that all students can access online assessment, that they have both the required hardware and software. Many students, as you know, are working from home. They're not on campus, and therefore we need to ensure that students have a fair opportunity to access that online assessment, and they can use the tools, the IT tools necessary for successful completion. We need to understand how best they can log in and how they can best use the software to support the online assessment. As we've already seen today, IT is not without its problems. Salim kindly came to my rescue with the PowerPoint presentation. Students similarly have similar issues. They concern obviously necessary as to how they save their work as they go along. They don't want their assessment work to be lost, particularly within time conditions, and how best they can get help with support in the event that they have computer problems in relation to the assessment. So all of these create an anxiety to the student or student body that needs to be managed by the institution. And if we don't manage it properly, that can actually support students moving towards external third-party help. So some of their frequently asked questions were, how will I be assessed? Where and how? How do I prepare? Academic integrity. What's allowed, what isn't allowed in terms of referencing, in terms of quotations, in terms of how we reference within an online assessment. And what we did here at this institution is to ensure that the message around academic integrity was personally delivered to students by their academic mentor and personal tutor. Yes, we had institutional policies. Yes, we discussed it with student unions and their representatives, but we made sure that every student had a meeting with their personal tutor so they understand the academic integrity requirements around online assessment. We felt that was necessary, and then we followed that up with direct communication, email communication with individual students from their personal tutor to ensure that the parameters of academic performance and academic integrity were complied with by the student. Clearly, we had to discuss marking as well. Students wanted to know whether they'd be marked harder because it was an online assessment with perhaps a bit more time to complete than in person. And of course, we needed to reassure them that we would treat marking in the same way as we would normally do for an assessment. So that's the background to online assessment. Has this actually worked? So what I've done is I've looked at some recent publications in the Times Higher. Now, one of the issues, certainly in America, that's come to light in December is the use of tutoring sites, one of the most popular being Chegg, of course. Now, I did mention previously that moving to online assessment and putting a time constraint of around 24 hours on the assessment isn't really going to dissuade students from using third-party assistance. And certainly within the state of Texas and various institutions in Texas, which is highlighted by the Times Higher, the move to online assessment and their use of honor codes clearly has not worked, because there's been use of online tutorial sites to provide real-time answers to students who post their questions on that site, and they will, within a matter of hours, get the answer back. And so it is something that obviously we as educators need to bear in mind when setting our assessments, that simply giving an online assessment in a short period of time in which to assess does not preclude third-party assistance, as was the case here. So these online tutorial sites, of which there is a proliferation, of course in the UK we've also noticed now a comparison website for all these sites as well, believe it or not. We've now got 100 sites on this comparison website in which their services are compared for students' use. So students are now being treated as consumers of these services. It's become normalized. It's pretty appalling, really. Group messaging, WhatsApp, WhatsApp, or whatever other form of messaging system. Again, students will use them to share information in relation to online assessments. And again, in Texas, they had a problem. Again, I've taken this from the Times Higher. The use of group messaging by students to share information, to share questions, again, is a problem, and again needs to be addressed by educators with their students. We need to have these upfront conversations with students about these sites. We need to explain it is not permissible, it is not acceptable, and it will not assist in their academic development. These are real concerns that we have as educators. And perhaps, well, horrifically, West Point, America's leading academy for development of army officers and other military personnel. Again, reported recently in Times Higher, students at that academy caught cheating, 59 of 73 suspects. Now, why I put this slide on here is that it serves to emphasize that these students, when they graduate, will go into the military, have access to weaponry, let's face it, that can end the world. Do we really want students with a low moral compass and ethical values which are entirely suspect graduating into areas such as this. And I put this up as an example, but it can apply to medicine, to engineering, to architects, to law. All the students that go into these professions, we need them to have a strong moral compass, a strong ethical background as to how to act. And as part of that, academic integrity is a key element in relation to that development of ethical behaviour. So one solution, certainly proposed by professional bodies, has been the use of proctoring software, online software which will invigilate online assessment by students. It's not it's not cheap. It is there's a cost to having the software license, but it adds complexity to the assessment process, no doubt. And so there are certain flags that this proctoring software will look for, whether in relation to the room in which the student is taking the assessment, there are unacceptable items referred to here, whether there's a second person detected in the room, whether or not the full face was visible on the webcam, sudden movements flagged, unnatural eye movements, suspicious behaviour, all logged, whether the room is too dark to record properly. These are all flags which the online software will pick up and produce a report to those actually marking the assessment. And that then leads to a process in which there has to be a review by those marking the assessment as to whether or not that assessment has been produced in a way which reassures them as to the academic integrity of that assessment. What will occur is that if they're not satisfied from the report and any subsequent investigation, is that they will not, the educators, we as markers, will not register the test as valid. And that will lead to a disciplinary process, depending upon the circumstances, or at the very least, the student retaking the assessment. So as I said, there's a complexity to use the proctoring software. Before the actual assessment, there has to be a test undertaken to ensure that the student can actually use the software and that their hardware is actually compatible, that the webcam is working, for example. They need to complete a pre-test normally to ensure that that everyone is satisfied that the test, when it actually happens, can be successfully taken, and then technical problems can be ironed out. All this is resource intensive, not least in terms of time. If they're taking the test at home, as many students are nowadays, then you need to ensure that they have an environment in which nobody's going to enter the room, where there's silence and where they can work quietly without interruption. Because as I've noted already, any interruption in the assessment process will be flagged as a potential academic integrity issue. On the day of the test, we need to ensure that, again, their software is working, and the test will only be permitted to be taken if they've actually taken and passed the pre-test to ensure that their hardware and software is actually compatible. And so coming on the day of the test to take the test, if you've not taken the pre-test, you will not be allowed to take the test. There must be identification checks. So there will be normally a passport, driver's license, or other form of ID which is shown and which can be verified by looking at that identification to ensure that the student is indeed that person who is due to take the test. There will be an environment check by the physical invigilator as well as the software invigilator, and those checks normally through the software are made through the webcam and monitor. So on the day, we'll also warn students that we will make unannounced entry into their environment, onto their computer to check what is actually going on. Before the assessment, they will have actually had to have shown the room to the invigilator to make sure it is clear of unauthorised material, and we will ad hoc pop into their room as well to check that all is as was at the start of the assessment. There are privacy requirements, obviously, around identity that need to be recognised as well. We need to reassure students that all data is held in accordance with the General Permitted Data Regulation applicable within Europe. The facial recognition system isn't one that normally is used by, for example, police forces. It doesn't recognise individual faces, only that there's a face within a frame to reassure students in relation to identity, but we will seek to match the ID later on in relation to that student. QAA, again, this year undertook a survey of academic institutions to see how online proctoring was working amongst those institutions. There was a fairly even split from HEA providers as to whether or not there had been additional safeguards put in place, but where safeguards were put in place, including ensuring consent to the collection of biometric data where that was actually used by way of identification, and ensuring that those invigilating the assessment had professional body checks and had not been disbarred under criminal legislation from acting in this sort of capacity as well, to reassure students. So as part of that survey analysis, the results clearly showed that HEI institutions needed to be aware of the possible disadvantages to students by the move to online assessment in relation to hardware and software, the extent of digital literacy of the student. We can't assume that all students are digital natives, for example, and whether or not institutions had in place mechanisms to support students through the use of loaned laptops or other devices in which to take the assessment. So there's no disadvantage to students. So the student issues identified by that survey: difficulty in relation to software, failure to upload exam files, crashes, problems logging into the site. Anything that can go wrong with tech can actually go wrong, and it does actually go wrong. That creates anxiety and pressure with the students, including concerns that security data have been breached. Now, one particularly high-profile case, which may amuse you somewhat, barristers, legal students potentially want to become legal practitioners. They sat their bar exams online with proctoring taking place both within assessment centres but also within home. And if they're undertaking it at home, one of the issues, of course, is that you cannot leave the room during the examination, which unfortunately led to scenes such as this across much of media about students unfortunately can't leave the exam to go to the toilet, and all that as a result of that, which did not play well with publicity in relation to online assessments and proctoring. It was particularly concerning. And so there are issues certainly around online assessments and being able to leave the room. Is proctoring software cheat-proof? No doubt Anne will say it's not, and it isn't. A brief cursory look at Google will give you variety of sites as how to cheat on those assessments which are using proctoring software. So it's not foolproof. It is certainly something that professional bodies require, but it isn't an answer in relation to academic integrity, but it certainly makes it more difficult that way. Wider implications for further research. I think we have a significant issue globally around ethics. Academic integrity plays into this ethical framework, this moral compass that I spoke to at the beginning. It's certainly something we're concerned about with the Council of Europe, which is why we have a platform for the development of ethics, integrity and transparency in education. In February of next year, I will be presenting to the Council and delegates from the Council on the policy framework, which we hope will be adopted perhaps towards the end of next year, or indeed the following year, which supports ethical development across all levels of education, kindergarten, primary, secondary, into post-secondary education, including higher education. And one of the things I'm interested in is, if you look at a program within your institution or programs within your institution, how many actually have modules on ethics? I would imagine not many. It'd be interesting, wouldn't it, Celine, if your university, my university, Nan's university, we produced a questionnaire and sent it round to everybody to determine just how many programs actually deal with ethical situations within that program. I suspect that some may touch on it, particularly the professional body programs will actually deal with ethics in some way, but I suspect a lot will not. And I think this is a real concern. It's clear that the public are concerned. We have a move towards decisions being made by algorithm, decisions being made digitally, not necessarily face-to-face in person. There's a concern about the ethical environment in which decisions are being taken, which are going to affect the public. There are concerns around students graduating with degrees which have not been legitimately achieved. And so, from my point of view, future research is going to be around legislation, certainly within the UK, which I'm heavily involved with. I was involved with the introduction of legislation within the Republic of Ireland. I've been an advocate for strict liability legislation for some time, and I'm pleased to see that Australia adopted strict liability within their legislation as well, which I think is important. I think the wider policy implications around ethics, certainly across education, is going to be a fertile area for future research, particularly across the Council of Europe. And I suspect this wider ethical dimension within the public domain as well. So I think I'm going to leave it there, and I'll hand over to Anne. I hope that's been a useful move through some of the issues around, certainly in the UK, around online assessment, which we're grappling with at the moment, and no doubt will do this year as well. So I'll stop presenting now, and thank you very much for listening.
Michael, thank you for this great tips on proctoring software, and also on the prevention of contract cheating and the other types of misconduct, especially when it comes to online assessment. And before we move to you, would you mind if we welcome some contributions from our PhD students for a few minutes, and then continue with you, because our PhD students are working as instructors of English at different universities, and I believe that they would like to contribute to this issue. I see one comment, for example, from Miranda in terms of using proctoring software. And my question to you, Michael, will be related to, okay, we use, let's say we use this proctoring software, but what about general data protection regulation? Would there be any issues related to GDPR? I mean, have you ever discussed this with your quality agency or at your school board? Michael, are you here? I guess he dropped. Let me check the participants. I guess he lost his connection, so let's wait for Michael. Meanwhile, while we are waiting for him, there were so many good issues that Michael touched, especially related to learning outcomes and our assessment procedure. It is quite important for us. We talk about curriculum development, and while we are developing our curriculum, we give importance to course outcomes, and then when we are planning our courses, we try to ensure that our students could develop these outcomes by the end of the lesson. So when it comes to assessment, we need to be assessing whether students are achieving these outcomes or not. Related to online education, I see that indeed it's not directly online education, but it's emergency remote teaching, so which is a bit different from the principles, the other important principles of distant education. So in emergency remote teaching, I see that some of our colleagues have an intention of simply turning their questions to the ones that are delivered online. I mean, let's suppose, for example, at the end of the semester in face-to-face classes, they were asking multiple choice questions in face-to-face examinations. When it comes to online education, they just ask these multiple choice questions in online examinations. If we do this, it means that we are encouraging our students for cheating. This is my understanding, because it has no points. I mean, students will be communicating with with each other, and we cannot protect this if we are simply asking, welcome back again, Michael. Hi. So we were just talking about the issues that you touched, learning outcomes and assessment. So asking multiple choice questions cannot be acceptable, for example. So it is quite important to design new testing assessment methodologies for our courses. And Michael, you referred to, for example, as far as I remember, students helping each other, or students looking for help from the others. This is indeed, we can relate with some pedagogical theories. For example, Vygotsky's zone of proximal development and scaffolding. Okay, we can, as teachers, we can help students to scaffold, or we can ask students to scaffold each other, what we understand from peer feedback, for example. However, we need to avoid collision. I mean, peer feedback should not turn into collision. For example, I'm teaching academic writing at undergraduate level, and I specifically encourage my students to exchange peer feedback. However, there is a systematic way of doing this without encouraging students for collision or for any other academic misconduct. So this would be a great achievement for students. Michael, my question for you before you dropped was related to use of proctoring software. Okay, let's suppose, for example, we have enough funds and our university is using proctoring software. My concern is related to GPDR. What about general data protection regulation? Have you ever discussed this? I mean, because there might be some issues, to my understanding. I've never tried this, but there might be some issues related to this. What do you think?
No, there clearly are, because it depends how data is obviously held and how data is actually used. We use a particular proctoring software company at this institution, and as part of the contract we have with them, we checked the GPDR compliance with their software, and the fact that they had a policy in place and they were compliant with GPDR. So we undertook our due diligence to ensure that data would be used according with the GPDR here in UK, and of course applies across Europe as well. So you do have to undertake that due diligence before you enter into a contract with the software supplier to ensure that is done. I think other concerns, other than data, is in allowed to, as I say, facial recognition as well. That's the fact that students' image is being presented. How's that going to be kept? Which is why we reassure students that we don't actually take their image. We see that there's somebody there, but the system we use don't actually record their actual face as well. So we reassure students in that way. So yes, there are concerns. I'm sure Anne will be able to say more about this as well.
Okay. Thank you for clarification, Michael. I see that Miranda wants to ask a question or contribute. Miranda, please. Miranda, if you are speaking, we cannot hear you.
Sorry for that. Okay. So, yeah, in Michael's presentation, there was an emphasis also on authentic assessment as one of the ways of promoting staying away from, high stakes assessment. And I'm also a strong advocate of authentic assessment as well, especially in English language teaching in the virtual format. Because I also believe that as also another element of what you said is probably building trust in this virtual format with your students and avoiding scenarios where we can cause anxiety, etc. But when we come up with the ways of authentic assessment or forms of authentic assessment, in our case, one of the concerns has become developing appropriate rubrics, but because it's something new, right? And then, okay, we come up with the new forms of assessing, but then developing rubrics is another skill. And this takes a long time because we are not trained for this. We have had no experience. We have zero experience with this format. So yeah, it's a complex issue, and I kind of wonder if you have had any experiences with this in your case as well, or any highlights.
Okay, thank you very much, Miranda, for that question, and I appreciate where it's coming from. I'd make a general point, first of all, about rubric design. This is where I think we can work with partners as students. I know that there's been a lot that's been published around working with students as partners in relation to assessment. And one of that is in around rubric design. I work with your students to produce a rubric that works for you and works for them around the assessment parameters. That way, of course, where students have been involved in the design of the rubric and the assessment parameters, they're more likely to attempt that on their own without reference to third-party assistance because they've had a hand in actually developing it. Not only that, part of the development could actually be part of the credit for the particular module as well. There's a way of introducing value to the student in terms of their participation in rubric development. I think from my point of view, because I'm a lawyer and basically I teach the law, it's much easier to produce an assessment which more accurately reflects what goes on in a practice environment. But what I think I mean by authentic assessment is not simply something that translates into practice, but also something that actually reflects what the students have been doing as part of the module, so that what you're doing is you're, in a way, assessing the work they've undertaken individually on that module, and they produce an assessment based on that individual input into that module, perhaps by way of a reflective journal, for example, that they've kept in relation to the work they've undertaken and researched. Now, I know that all of these things can be replicated by third-party assistance, but it makes it much more difficult to do so where you have these bite-sized assessments all the way through that tend to reflect students' own involvement and their own particular viewpoint in relation to the content of a module. Does that help?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda.
It also helps to hear that even on that part of the world, you have similar concerns and views on these things, even in a different department and field of study.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. It's quite good to hear that my students are becoming aware of the fact that these are common problems. I mean, because people think that these are the problems that are valid for a specific country or valid for a specific discipline. However, this is not. So that's why we established European Network for Academic Integrity, because we know that we are globally experiencing similar problems and we need to cooperate in terms of providing solutions to our common problems. Hatice, before we move to you, I'd like to ask for your patience, please, and give the floor to Anne. And then I'm sure Anne will be contributing to our understanding, and then I'm going to ask for your participation, please. Yes, Anne, the stage is yours. And thank you for your participation. Thank you for your valuable contribution in advance. We are very pleased to see you here. Welcome again.
Thank you very much, and for the lovely welcome and the opportunity to talk about my favourite subject. It was a research stream I had not anticipated, but it's proven to be very timely and exciting. And I'll start, first of all, I'll explain that Wollongong, if you don't know where Wollongong is, which most people don't, it's about an hour and a half south of Sydney City from the Opera House. So it's very close to Sydney. It's not in Sydney, but very, very close. And I'd also like to start with something that has become more of an issue with Australia as we acknowledge our Indigenous population. And I'll start with what we call an acknowledgement of country, which is acknowledging that where our university is situated is actually on the land, the Aboriginal land of the Dharawal and Wadi people of the Eora Nation. So we recognise that our knowledge comes from a very ancient past, and we acknowledge our current custodians, the past ancestors, and the future generations who will be contributing to society. So I just wanted to start with that particular note. Now, all going well, I will screen share this, and you should see, hopefully.
Yes.
Okay, good. You can see it. Good. Excellent. So I'm going to talk about academic integrity, obviously. I have degrees in education as well as discipline areas. So I've found it's a very nice complementary space, which has helped me think more about assessment design and the design of curricula in relation to academic integrity. Because as Michael pointed out through his presentation with the recent examples with COVID, no matter what we do, someone will try and design a hack, a cheat, a workaround to whatever sort of thing we put in place. So tying our assessment design back to learning outcomes, but also how we structure the assessment design is really important. And we should be designing stuff not so we're preventing cheating, but focusing on that educative point. So we've got a slide, we've gone too far. So I'm talking about, first of all, the link between academic integrity and learning design. And it is about bringing our policies and processes and curricula together. But the learning design is influenced by our policies and processes, our government legislation, our requirements. Michael touched on accreditation requirements. We have issues with that as well. So we're not only doing things from an institutional standpoint, but we're also doing things from an accrediting body standpoint. And with teaching English, English-speaking nations tie a great value on IELTS and the accreditation of English language expertise. So we've got these accreditation aspects on top of everything else that we have to do. But I put a design into a paper that was in the IJEI in 2017, and if you're not aware, with the International Journal for Educational Integrity, the beauty about it is it's open access, so everyone can get to the papers, and it's a great way of sharing knowledge. But this particular design I put in is, I call it a cycle of assessment development, that what we do in one session has to feed into how we move forward. And it's particularly relevant now with the shift to remote delivery, dual mode delivery, and varieties in the way we do things, that we need to have this constant refinement. In some cases, it might mean restructuring totally, but in other cases, it might mean small tweaks or touches or slight changes. So this is a cycle that I developed, experimented, and it's how I approach things with my own teaching. But I've also shared it with colleagues in other countries as well as in my institution. But for every session, I review assessments. The questions don't stay the same because, as Salim pointed out, if we don't change questions, or if they're the same questions from session to session, people know the answers or they can find the answers easily. So I'm always reviewing assessments and criteria in the curricula to meet the learning outcomes. But I always discuss and embed academic integrity in lectures and tutorials. It's not about having an entire lecture devoted to it, but it's about feeding it in through various parts. So when I talk about an assessment, I will actually explain about the academic integrity criteria. And it's led to some really interesting conversations with students. I'm very upfront with them that I research in the area. Does it stop students trying to cheat in my class? No. I think some of them look at it as a bit of a chance to see if they can test out my knowledge and see if they can beat me. And bring it on, and I'll still have the conversation with them. But nobody in my classes can turn around and say, hey, I wasn't aware about academic integrity. I wasn't aware about the ethical aspects in relation to this assessment. And for the students who are disengaged or purport to be disengaged by saying things such as, well, you know, as long as I get my degree at the end of it, I don't care how I get there. I say to them, I teach MBA students, and I say to them, you get an MBA and you walk into a workplace, your employer is going to expect some certain things out of you. You've paid for a subject, why not try and learn something? Because when that employer asks you to do something, you will actually have that knowledge. So it's actually trying to demonstrate the importance of education. The bottom half of the cycle talks about the examination and grading of submissions. So yes, we have technology to flag stuff. We know technology isn't perfect, whether it's proctoring software, whether it's software like Turnitin. But there are other things that I've found, patterns and irregularities that point to things not being the way they should be. And some of them are around these issues around referencing and citation irregularities, how language is used, and did the person actually answer the question I submitted? And so if this was a written assessment task, did they actually answer the question? But this is where it comes back to us. I compare irregularities across the cohort. It's not always the student's fault. Sometimes we mightn't have structured a question correctly. We mightn't have given criteria or instructions clear enough. And where we have a situation at the moment that students can't doorstop us leaving a classroom to ask a quick question. And I was really encouraged by Michael's talk about how the one-on-one contact with tutors is one way of making sure students have those opportunities to ask questions. Sometimes the irregularities, if I'm finding people have missed the same sort of thing, it could be in the way I've actually structured a question or the way I've actually explained something or not provided sufficient resource. So I use these as methods of things to check, put a quality assurance against my own work. But where someone has breached something, it's really important to have conversations with students about it, what the particular thing is, and find out why. Why is this irregularity there? And that does two things. One, I'm trying to genuinely understand the student situation. It's informed by research and practice around academic integrity and developing a greater understanding of why people do things the way they do. But it also contributes to a behavioural shift, because people know that if something is wrong, you are actually going to have a conversation about it, and students will avoid those conversations. So if it means a choice between doing the work or having the confrontation about not doing your own work, they'd rather actually put in something. So these are where this cycle comes in, but they all feed into each other. Just go down, next one. The thing about learning and assessment design is they are the only areas really where we have control in the assessment process. We cannot control student motivation. We can engage, we can encourage, we can, we've got brilliant teachers whose students just love coming to their classes. But when that student is sitting in front of a machine or trying to do an assessment task, we cannot control what's going on in their mind at that particular point in time. We cannot control whether a student decides to or is influenced to cheat or adopt cheating behaviours. We can explain, we can teach about ethics, but the judgment, the final judgment decision is down to that particular student. It's also impacted at the moment by where we've got online versus on-campus circumstances, and that's really a moving feast for all countries at the present time. So, additional issues related to the current circumstances. Michael was touching on the fears and capabilities of students, and and staff to that matter. We do have technology issues with students, and we do have technology issues with staff. Michael also touched on the digital natives. One of the things that's been very interesting for me is that we have students who are very technically capable, but on a handheld device. And if you put them in front of a computer, asking them to type into a proctored exam, that becomes a challenging thing, because they're not necessarily used to keyboards. They're used to swiping and flipping and expanding with fingers. But when you put them in front of a keyboard, it's a very different thing, to the point that our institution had to establish a loaner laptop scheme, because there were a number of students who were relying on on-campus equipment. Because of COVID and lockdowns, that wasn't available, so we actually had to create a loan system for them. Similarly, even with lockdown, we did get some exemptions for students, and it was only a very small minority, where some actually had to come to campus to take an on-campus assessment. So they were booked in, things were cleaned down, they were supervised, because their personal circumstances were either their internet access at home was unstable, it was a shared environment with a number of students, so they couldn't even get that dedicated space. There were too many people trying to do it at the same time. Or we did have power outages. So there are a number of things that impact students in different ways, so we had to adapt. What we've found in our circumstances in Australia, so we still have cases of academic misconduct being reported, which for me is encouraging, that people are not just saying, well, it's just too hard at the moment, so people are identifying cases. But we've seen more of a shift in Australia from purchasing. The legislative impact of our contract cheating legislation is having some effect, and the government is barring some websites. It's not 100% there, but it's certainly making a difference. But the biggest thing we've found is collusion. And it comes back to that point about things like Chegg. But we've also found students using things like gaming sites through PlayStations and things, where they've got a chat going through the PlayStation gaming group while they're doing an online assessment. Now, these are things we hadn't even thought about. And so it comes back to that point of just when we think we've got a handle on what everybody can do, someone will find something different to do. The shift to remote delivery in Australia, Australia closed its borders fairly quickly to China, and that was a week before our session one started in our postgraduate space. So we had to do a shift very, very quickly into remote delivery. And so I had to take a couple of unusual steps, but in some respects they were almost liberating. We did need to change and adapt assessment tasks. Some of our regulatory bodies made some concessions because they realised the shift to remote delivery was so quick, and to accommodate our international students who are still studying with us but based in their home countries. But one of the things I had said to our teams was that if they revise their assessment tasks in line with the subject learning outcomes, I said, consider it an experiment. What's the tweak you've always wanted to try with an assessment task, still to achieve the learning outcomes, but it's been too difficult because of, oh, I have to change it and I have to do this and I need approval and it needs to be signed off. It had to be signed off by discipline heads, so we removed a couple of layers of bureaucracy and people experimented. The results were quite astounding. Students actually enjoyed some of the assessment tasks more. the academics actually then sought formal approval to actually implement some of those assessment tasks. So some of the fears of change were actually overcome by saying to people, this is a unique circumstance, try something different. And people who were skilled in their area tried some different and amazing things. And sometimes I think, and it comes back to the point I think that both Salim and Michael were making, is that we've tried to make some online assessment tasks ask the same question, use the same method, but the method of delivery of this subject is very, very different. So we used it as an opportunity to actually reframe assessment design, and it's been quite successful. I'm going to come to some elements of assessment design, and I think this is where we can integrate both the need for academic integrity into how we design assessment. And it comes back to, Michael talked about small stake stuff. There are very few of our subjects, apart from honours or based research projects, that are based on a single high stakes assessment task at the end of the subject. There tend to be 2 to 3 pieces of assessment in a subject. There can be some smaller weekly tasks. So the assessment design is quite, what would I say, amenable to being adapted to a different situation. But when it comes to decision, we have a lot of things to consider. And I know that the question Miranda asked, and she was talking about the rubrics, and Michael said about getting students engaged in rubric design, which is a really practical, useful and powerful way of making changes but not putting all the burden on the academic. But there are lots of things we need to consider, all these different type things, the level of study, whether it's practical, whether it's a core subject, whether it's an elective subject, whether it's got accreditation requirements. But one of the things I've found, and there are some good reasons why we have exams in disciplines such as medicine. We have a medical school attached to our university as well. I have now the School of Law reporting through to me. They have very strict accreditation requirements, as do accounting. They have very strict requirements, and they are very focused on proctored examinations. But even they this year, apart from medicine, have gone to some non-proctored assessment tasks. But there is, outside of those accreditation requirements, I had a number of academics for whom examinations were a default. That was the only way they felt comfortable in actually thinking that a student did their own assignment. And when we actually started exploring it a bit more, we started having conversations like this. What do we actually want the students to do? And what can the students do when they come into my class, and what do I want them to be able to do when they leave? So some of this is about reframing how we do what we do. So think about, for people who've taught a subject over a period of time, what are the patterns that you notice? I'm very much into patterns of behaviour. But use the previous outcomes to inform what you do in the future. So if you felt or found that students have cheated on a particular assessment task, what could you do to change it? How could you look at it a bit differently and still achieve the learning outcomes? And I did find this, particularly with some of my more mature academics in the faculty, a lot of them assessed the way they were assessed when they studied. And it's not about that. Things have changed. And so we have to change some of the ways we do things. If you design an assignment carefully, it can actually make your work easier, and it can make cheating more obvious. And the thing is this, and I learned this through doing a master in higher ed, was to experiment. Because if it doesn't work, you can meet still meet the learning outcomes, but you can refine. Take the learning and refine it. So it's not also about the design, it's also about the questions we ask. If you frame a question properly, it can make attempts at cheating more obvious. So it won't prevent it. There is no assessment task that is totally cheat-proof. But a poorly framed exam question can cause just as much problem as a poorly framed assessment question. So some of the things are trying to include current events, different sorts of resources to actually stimulate people. So changing an assessment task is more than just changing the names, the cases, the values, or the texts. We know students share. We know the answers are on the internet. We know a new edition of a textbook, the instructor's guide, will be on the internet as soon as the thing is published. So it's not about that. It's about being creative in different ways. If you are in doubt, when you're setting a question, Google it. As soon as the student Googles a question, it will be picked up by an RSS feed, and then that directs students to cheating sites. So, for example, I was quality assuring an assessment task that someone had done in a management area, and they were asking the students to write about a particular theoretical framework. And I spoke, this guy's a great teacher. But I said to him, have you actually Googled that question? And he said, no. And I said, you Google it and see how many sites get hit. This is before all the sites got blocked in Australia. And he was actually appalled. He actually hadn't sat and thought that way, because he thought, well, I didn't cheat as a student, so my students won't cheat either. And it's like, you've got to change your thinking. But by putting some context about it, taking a recent event from the media, and asking students to apply that theory to a particular situation suddenly gave it context. And in the research I've done, I've found that cheating sites or sites selling essays and assignments can't meet those contextual factors. So they'll talk about the theory, but they won't be able to apply it to that particular context. So that for me is a flag of when someone has actually used a service rather than address the question. So how do you decide if you need to change something with your subject? Direct feedback. I ask questions, lots of questions. I use teacher and subject evaluation. I use feedback from tutors. I use comments from students during consultations. But I'm trying to pick up patterns and clues. Now, whether that's some of the training and background I had through questions I used in human resources or what, I'm not too sure. But I find it such a rich source to get information from students. Indirect feedback. How many questions do you get asked either in class or online or in a consultation or in a tutorial? A concern evident through a number of submissions may be related to the design of the assessment, the question or detail or lack of detail provided in subject outlines and support materials. Now, I've seen some academics go to the extent of writing too much in a question to try and clarify stuff where it's actually confused people more. So I've actually had to work with people to simplify the language. Then there are others who provide such scant information that the students really don't know which way to go. Use it to inform future changes. That's what you can do. Use these questions. It's not a criticism, it's actually great feedback. And just as we should be giving feedback to our students, we can use that feedback for ourselves. References and citations. I've done a lot of work in the area, which now Kath Ellis has coined as bibliographic forensics. It's actually indications of the richness and the quality of what someone does. But cheating sites actually manipulate references. So they're not legitimate. They're either missing something, they're missing details, they're smashed together. And again, there's I've got a paper on that same one as the one with the diagram actually has a list of the common things I find in reference lists that are indicators to contract cheating. So I actually, when I'm grading work, and it's still the case now, I actually target the reference list before I target anything else, because it's actually an indicator of quality. And I actually put details in the assessment criteria and in the rubric of those sort of things I'm expecting. And if it meets the criteria, that's one filter. But it's also a very good litmus test for you if the criteria is being met. Now, I'm going to give you an example of something did with a class. I actually did this as part of an assignment where I was challenged to actually critically evaluate assessment tasks I had in a subject using literature, and then come up with some different ways of actually approaching the subject. And I ended up with far more than I ever bargained for in terms of learning about things, challenging students who can surprise you in ways that you just didn't expect. So the original assessment design, I inherited a subject. It had an essay, 1,500 words theory base. It was worth 20%. It had a 3,000 word report. The person I inherited it from was of the impression, the more words you write, you know, the more rigorous the assessment. I now take the reverse view. The fewer words you write, the harder it is. And it also had an exam at the end. Now, this would have been a situation, this was an on-campus subject, but it has been changed to an off-campus subject, but the changes I made still stand up, even in a remote delivery environment. So some considerations I had to do. The students, it wasn't part of a set curriculum, so they didn't take subjects in order, but I had a variety of different skill levels coming into the class. And I found, and this is something that happens even with students coming in out of our high school system into Australia into higher education, or international students coming into our system from other countries, is there's a wide variety of previous experiences. So whilst we'd like to say we had a consistent referencing and writing standard worldwide, or even in Australia, or even within a state, the fact is people have different educational experiences. And some students in this class had traditionally tried to cheap purchase borrow materials. There were reasonably high failure rates. The AQF I'm referring to here is the Australian Qualifications Framework. So our government has educational levels that we need to comply with at certain levels of study. It was a cross-cultural communication class. I find that when students purchase an exam, an answer, it's very generic. It's very bland. It's just like anybody could have written it, or it sounds like it came straight from a textbook. What I've found is students with poor quality of English skills, they have difficulty in telling whether the borrowed or purchased material meets the assessment criteria. So they trust the marketing and the rhetoric of the website that says, hey, we will give you a good quality of thing, and they don't actually sit there and look at it and go, hey, I didn't really get what I paid for. I came up with some ideas, but I sought some assistance from a colleague in learning development, Dr. Celeste Rosetto, and I also got some assistance to receive with some tutorial tasks. The success of what happened meant that some of these things actually ended up in other subjects. So this is a fairly busy slide, but it tells you how the thought process came about. So I was looking at the learning outcomes. I also wanted to develop academic and professional skills, but because of my research interests, I also want to promote academic integrity. So what I did was I actually established cross-cultural groups. Now, I could do this because I had some international students, but you can find different ways of breaking up your students. into different groups. So what you're trying to do is avoid the groupthink. You're trying to avoid, I always study with my friends. And if people challenge you and say, but I always want to study with this person, I link it back to workplaces. You don't always get a choice of who you work with. You go to an employer, you will be put into a team, you don't know those people. So I sold it to the students on the basis that here's a way of practicing in a safe environment how to work with different people. So I made it work relevant. And the first assignment formed the basis of the second assignment. So in this particular case, the students practiced cross-cultural communication skills or communicating with people they weren't used to communicating with. So the assessment task that I came up with was students had to source themselves 3 papers on a particular topic. The group then they had to write a short piece of writing. They had to write 250 words on each paper. But then the groups had to condense all those pieces of writing into one article. So they had to take, the students weren't allowed to have the same paper. They had to negotiate between themselves. I facilitated. But this is where, and Sally mentioned Vygotsky, good old Vygotsky came in here as well, that the more competent students were helping, the less competent students explaining it. But they also asked questions when they didn't understand. And again, I tied that back to workplaces. You'd ask your boss or your team leader if you didn't understand something. So again, this was replicating a workplace, and they could translate these skills. But they were given an answer with no correct answer. So it required a cognitive or thinking approach in order to address the problem. So I was actually giving them, it was collaborative problem solving. And their ability to use external materials was very limited. So any attempts to cheat were obvious. The groups, there was some intergroup accountability. They then had to, the second assignment reflected on the interactions in the first assignment. So this comes back to this scaffolding, but it was also integrated assessment. And in this case, there was still a final exam, but they had a reflective question on what they'd learned about cross-cultural communication. There was some amazing insights that came out of it. But the biggest one was they took what they'd learned in this subject about writing and finding papers and condensing writing, and they took it into other subjects. So I was really encouraged by that. But that was about experimenting with something and challenging something and doing something a bit different. Yes, it takes time, but sometimes we've got to give something else a go. Come on, woo. Outcomes. In the end, that final assessment exam ended up as a report assignment. Have I been nervous about getting rid of exams? Yes. I've turned another subject. I turned a 3,000-word report into a 500-word identify a problem and find me some literature to define some key terms. And the number of students who failed that assignment was amazing, but the number of students who passed the final assessment when they actually understood what the final task was about was incredible. I'm a big advocate of short writing is more difficult than longer pieces. It's actually harder. People will pad out writing, but short writing is actually harder for students to do, condensing information. The beauty of shorter writing, 500, 1,000 words, is it's easier for us to mark. So there are actually some paybacks in this. I did facilitated group work, so I didn't send students away. Tutorial time was devoted to group work. And students had the chance to ask the question. People actually came to tutorials because they knew they'd get the assignment work done. And it's really challenged my assessment design. I now challenge people. And I'm amazed that we're hesitant to challenge students sometimes, and we can. I've put a thing up here about currency and challenge. As far as putting recent context, we've got a rich variety of resources with social media, news items, YouTube. Take some of those things and make that the core of the discussion or the assessment task. It will give you that differentiating point. It gives people currency with what's going on, but it gives those contextual factors that a lot of cheating sites and sharing sites can't achieve. And if you do use exams, one of the things that I found, even in the current environment, is we have to ensure questions and instructions are consistent. If people are confused, that's when they start going on the internet or asking friends and they're seeking clarification. We have to understand if our questions and instructions are consistent. And I'm not sure what QA practices you have where you are. We do have one within our faculty, and they're the sort of challenging questions we ask. It's about getting critical feedback, and it's to make things better, not to tear us down. I'm asking people to be open to new ideas, opportunity. I'm taking a real positive educational spin on this, you'll see. We can experiment within government's guidelines, but we can change things. We're not welded. We're welded to learning outcomes. We do have to meet accreditation requirements, but there is still room to move in those spaces, and they can make things exciting for students, but also for ourselves. Research opportunities. I call this thing about tipping points. I know Malcolm Gladwell talks about it in marketing terms, but I've got interest in when students actually decide to do it. So we know students cheat, we know students try and outsource work, we know students cheat, but at what point do they make that decision? Is it at the start of session? Is it when they've read the assessment task, when they've gone through one lecture based on previous experience? I'm wanting to try and understand some of those trigger points, because while I talk about it in lectures and I explain what I research, students are still cheating. And I want to know when they make that decision and how they make that decision. I think we need to learn more about search patterns, access patterns and impact of marketing. Students obviously believe the rhetoric on some of the cheating websites or sharing websites that this is great and it's good and it will help them. What do the impacts of those marketing things have? Because then we can potentially counteract that. And I'd also like to track how some of the assessment patterns or changes have actually contributed to patterns of cheating or eliminating or reducing impacts of cheating. One of the things I will share with, we do have an intervention program at our institution. So if someone, the majority of cases we're picking up on the first case is poor academic practice, and we put students through an intervention program. And I'll just flip slides for a moment and hopefully this will, has that one come up? Can you see an aware thing, Salim, or not?
No, we don't see it, Anne.
Okay.
We just see tipping points and current circumstances.
Okay.
Okay.
So we've put together, what I might do is, can I stop sharing? I've got good at sharing and now trying to stop the share. Have I stopped sharing?
No, you still share, Anne, your presentation.
Still share.
Yeah,
Okay.
we see the PPT, but it's not in presentation mode.
Okay. One of the things we have is an intervention program. So if someone is picked up with low-level academic misconduct, it might be cut and paste. It might be something like that we put them through an intervention program which goes through to a deeper explanation of the ethical standpoint, why it is important to do what they need to do in terms of rules and things. And what we've found is that there is a very small percentage. For the first year we introduced it, for the first session we had, there were 378 cases reported. Only 3 students reoffended. And that for us was very encouraging in the case that the intervention program is giving that deeper level of knowledge for students to understand what they need to do, why they shouldn't cheat, and how they can improve things in the future. So we've actually found that patterns increased. We're yet to compare the data from 2020 with the current circumstances that we've had to see the change. And as I noted at the beginning of the presentation, what we've noticed is a shift to collusion. And that collusion is where students are either trying to take an assessment task at the same time, an online assessment task at the same time, or those things where they've got the chat going on in the background through either a gaming platform or some other means of communication where they're sharing answers. And we are not using a proctoring, online proctoring invigilation solution at the present time. So we are aware that that is actually contributing to these cases of collusion. But we have successfully pursued some of these cases at the institution to address them. But that's the current trend that we're noticing in relation to remote delivery. Whether we've evaluated some proctoring solutions, I know the legislation has some issues. One of the big things for us is privacy. Even with students providing some form of identification, we're querying about how that's captured and who has access to that information, because identity theft is a real and present danger. So at the moment, we've shifted as much as we can from online assessment, timed assessment, but there are still some of those things there. We've had to go to some extreme measures with our medical and nursing students into the pack that we've had to extend examination periods for those groups, because we cannot have so many people in a particular room at a particular time, that it has to be cleaned down and things like that. So their challenges we see are going to be ongoing and cannot find any way of getting around those particular requirements at the present time. And as Michael would probably agree, in the medical field, they're things that we can't necessarily change. As our nursing colleagues always tell us, you cannot test if someone can put a catheter in someone online. It's just the form of online assessment you cannot do. You might be able to stick a needle in a banana, but yeah, there are certain things you still have to have that face-to-face, and that's going to be an ongoing challenge in the COVID environment. So I'll leave that there. I'm happy to take questions or contribute to the general discussion, but I could talk about this stuff for hours. That's the problem. It's just so, there's so much there, and I just want people to embrace learning, love of knowledge, and the challenge of educating yourself, because education is such a privilege. No one can take it away from you. But if you haven't earned that knowledge in the first place, it's just such a shame. So I'll hand back to you, Salim, and I'm trying to work out how to stop sharing because I can't. Oh, hang on. Hide share options. I can't see where I can get rid of the share on the screen.
I just click request control.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so.
Yep. Allow. There you go.
Okay.
Oh, I found stop presenting, finally.
Okay. Thank you, and another amazing contribution from a different perspective. And both Michael and Anne, they provided invaluable experiences, tips for the design of the courses, and specifically for the design of assessments. And I see that you specifically referred to several times to use of rubrics. And
yes.
When it comes to use of rubrics, to my understanding, rubrics should be developed by the instructor. if this is used by several instructors by the department, for example, so it is best to be developed by the department. I mean, a departmental rubric with feedback from students. And in my classes, what I do with the rubric is I don't use my rubric only to assess my students. However, I use the rubric to encourage my students to exchange peer feedback. So this is a material, this is a pedagogical material that I make it available throughout the semester. Not only happens at the end of the semester. I give the rubric to my students, explain the criteria and how to assess, what to assess, so give information about the assessment procedure. And I'm working at Faculty of Education, so they are going to be future teachers. So in a way, in writing classes, I'm encouraging my students to take responsibility to give feedback to their future students. So this is another contribution. I mean, when we check the relevant literature, we already see that giving feedback also contributes to the development of academic writing skills. Indeed, students who give feedback get more contribution from this process from the ones who receive feedback. So this is really a valuable experimentation for students. Thank you for mentioning about this. This is very important. And another thing here, okay, we are assessing students, but what do we assess? In the literature, for example, if we are talking about writing tasks, we can see the general differences between process approach and product approach. In product approach, we focus on student written product, and we try to reveal, for example, mistakes and then reduce points as penalty from these mistakes. However, if we are focusing on process approach, then it means that we need to understand how the student progress throughout the semester. So indeed, students are not competing with each other. However, they are competing with themselves. I mean, they are adding extra information, extra steps to their own development. So this is quite important. Trying to understand the full picture from a bottom-up, from a top-down perspective rather than a bottom-up perspective. This is another important point here. And what it makes it different from your case and in Canada and Michael in United Kingdom, you are instructing in English. This is L1 for your country. Now we need to refer to Kashru's circles. Inner circle countries, outer circle, and expanding circle countries. I mean, here you might be experiencing some other problems that are coming from expanding circle countries and outer circle countries. For example, we know that you can take some actions against essay mills that are operating in United Kingdom or in Canada. But what about the essay mills that are operating in Nigeria, for example, who are producing assignments in English and selling them to your country? So this is another problem which is valid for you. However, it is something different in our case. For example, mainly universities in Turkey are instructing in Turkish. So if we can control the situation in our country, probably to a good extent, we will be able to solve the problem. But it is more I'm sorry for you, but it's more complicated for you to provide a solution because it goes beyond the borders of your countries to find a solution. This is maybe because of the lingua franca role of English, international role of English, but it is good. Another thing that I'd like to contribute, you mentioned about some students who are more capable. Yes, that's good. If we, when it comes to peer feedback, asking students to peer feedback, mainly we will be facing with two problems. One, students may not reluctance to criticize each other because of affecting their social relationship. So that's why I am running peer feedback exchange anonymously. That's one of the things. And secondly, they may not trust the peer feedback. sometimes, especially if feedback is coming from so-called poor student to a good student, more proficient student, probably there will be lack of confidence into the feedback. That's why I am assigning one student with 3 papers, and they are receiving from multiple peers so that they can criticize the peer feedback. We need to consider this. This is called as asymmetrical feedback exchange. I mean, symmetrical feedback exchange is the ideal one. However, when we think about the realities in the classroom, homogeneity of the students in the classroom, establishing such an environment to exchange symmetrical feedback is an utopia. Therefore, we need to find ways how to balance asymmetrical feedback in a reliable way. This is the other important point. Thank you, and it was amazing. Both of your contributions were amazing to this session, and I'm sure our students would like to have some discussions, would like to be the part of these discussions. Hatice, I remember you were supposed to be saying something. Would you be still eager to say something, to contribute, please?
Yes, Hocam, actually, I'm glad that you made me ask the question at the end, because I want to ask my question to Anne as well in a different way. So as you know that I'm working about contract cheating for my paper, and also I'm working on assignments in Turkey. So there's one thing I cannot make sense of actually about the case in Turkey. Well, it's illegal to receive the service, but it's not to provide the service in Turkey, as far as I can understand from what I researched so far. So maybe Michael could, as a lawyer, could help me make sense of the issue. And also I wanted to ask about the case in the UK. And also for Anne, and you know, I am working with Zinat, and she told me that it's not the case in Australia. So it's illegal to provide the service too, as far as I can understand. So how did that work out? Or how much did it work out? What is the extent to which it did and did not work out, actually? That's my question. Thank you, Hocam.
Michael, before I leave the word to answer it to you, I'd like to clarify that previously we welcomed Thomas Lancaster here, and as you can imagine, Thomas avoided dealing with legal issues, and he left the word for you. We discussed the issue of contract cheating with Thomas Lancaster, and left the legal issues, the legislation, to you. So it's your turn, and thank you in advance for your contribution.
Thank you very much, Salim. What I will say first of all about the UK is that it's not the case that we don't have legislation that might address the issue of SA mills and contract cheating. We have something called the Fraud Act 2006, which makes it a criminal offence to, in effect, participate in fraudulent activity. The problem that we have in terms of using that legislation against SA mills is that SA mills generally have very extensive terms and conditions. And those terms and conditions, the contract which they agree to supply the essay to the student, provide that it must not be used as a submission for an assignment or an assessment. It is provided for reference purposes only, and nothing more. So in effect, they present themselves as providing a legitimate service. They're basically providing knowledge, but it can't be used by way of a submission to a student's assignment. Now, we know, of course, that students ignore that. And of course, most SA mills now know, because of the wider publicity, that students are ignoring that. So the question then is, are those SA mills acting dishonestly? So in order to commit a criminal offence of fraud, you must be dishonest. Now, what is that test of dishonesty? Is it subjective or is it objective? And as a lawyer, these questions are very important about what you do know, and about what an ordinary person on the street would say your activity is. Is it objectively dishonest Did you know it was dishonest? And so there's been some confusion in the UK in the case law as to whether or not dishonesty was both a subjective and objective test, or was it simply objective. Better view now seems to be it's simply objective, and that might make it easier to actually establish a criminal offence against SA Mills in the UK. We don't have case law, we don't have a test case at the moment to establish that. But it has the unfortunate consequence of also drawing the student into that process of a criminal offence, which we don't want. As educators, we don't want that. We want to actually target the supply side, not the demand side in terms of the law. We don't want to involve students in the law. That's not what we're about. And so we are concerned that if we use the Fraud Act, we will draw the students into that criminal offence arena as well, which is why we're pushing for bespoke legislation, rather like they have in Australia now, which basically targets the specific activity of contract cheating, and specifically the supply side, and unlike Australia, take away the risk of prosecution in relation to students, friends and family. We just want to target the commercial providers. Now, why you have in Turkey a position whereby the student may be guilty of an offence and not the supplier, will, I'm afraid, depend upon your law, and that's not something I'm an expert in or something I'm qualified to actually comment on. But common to all jurisdictions will be this idea of a contract, that where you agree to buy, where you agree to supply a service, there is a contract. So I would look at the elements of that contract, see where that legislation based on again, yes.
Michael, it was just breaking up at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I thought sorry.
Yeah, I think in Turkey it might be the supplier is hiding behind the terms and conditions rather like they do in the UK, and so that they might not be liable contractually as a result of their terms and conditions. Of course, that will not apply to the student.
Definitely, Michael. We need legislation as soon as possible at the earliest convenience, because these companies, these SA mills, know how to act and they can adapt to new situations. However, if we can regulate our legislation accordingly, then I believe that there is a way of preventing them. Protecting our students from them. However, we need legislation, strict legislation about this issue.
Yeah, can I just add as well? I think what legislation does, it changes the conversation you have with the student as to the consequences of buying an SA or contract cheating or services from a third party. But also it means that you can go to social media platforms like Google, like Facebook, YouTube and the rest, and say, look, your policies state that you will not be complicit in illegal activity. Take the adverts down. And so it forces that advertising that is so crucial, that oxygen of publicity, which is so crucial, a platform is taken away by the use of legislation. And I think that's the most important thing about legislation. It changes the conversations you can have with those involved with SA mills. I'm sure Anne will note that's already happened in Australia, of course.
Yeah, the consequences. This is quite important. It will make you stronger against these SA mills. So, and you should be experiencing this change in your country as well, because you are also protected by law, Australian law. So,
yeah, the law was passed late last year. So it had been drafted and it came into effect, I think it was the end of September last year. What we have seen is that some of the shop fronts that some people selling essays have disappeared. There was one located very close to the campus of the University of New South Wales, and it's been shut down because Kath Ellis kept an eye on it. We know the government has barred access to a lot of sites, but as we know with people who are very sophisticated with web addresses, that they will either reposition their URLs and web location to appear that they're in another country and not in Australia, so that they can try and, people who are so desperate to do that. The legislation that's come through, they've been very clear that they are attacking the suppliers and not the students, unless the student is supplying, so it's all down to supply. The penalties for students using something, even in the current legislation, is up to the institution. So the actions against students are related to the institution, whereas the actions against the providers is actually the government's responsibility. COVID's put a whole different perspective on it. Our Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency, TEQSA, that regulates the higher education sector, has put on someone specifically to look at this or to control the management of it so we can escalate up. But as I said, COVID's not taken the priority off it, but there were other priorities that have had to come up. So we have noticed that some sites are inaccessible, but I have noticed that some have made mirror images through other different things or tried to hide their tracks. So it's a constant game. We've got, I know as an institution, we had over 1,200 sites barred on campus. So if someone was on campus, they were actually blocked. It didn't stop someone doing it off campus, but the government has those lists and is trying to do stuff. But what it hasn't stopped and the legislation hasn't covered so far is this barter, this trade society file sharing, which is something I've been tracking for about 7 or 8 years now. So the bartering sites are still there because they're saying they're sharing student resources to improve knowledge. They're not selling assignments per se. So I'd like to see the legislation extended to these bartering sites because students are using those, and that was one of the collusion cases we actually picked up late last year, was that someone had taken information off a bartering site in another state, and it was actually a law subject, but they were using the law from another state, not the law from the state where the examination was being taken. So it was very obvious that there was something wrong there and had been taken from a bartering site. So the bartering sites is if you upload something, you get exchange credits, then you bank up your exchange credits and that lets you download something from another site. ThinkSwap is a particular one I hate. Course Hero operates in a similar way. Miranda's asking a question, what are the bartering sites they trade knowledge for? Is you upload one of your assignment answers and you can download someone else's assignments from another subject. You can look them up by institution, you can look them up by subject, you can look them up by assessment type. And this is where not changing assessments is particularly, she said, how creative. I find it very annoying. And some students actually leave their student numbers on there. I mean, how stupid can you be? But yeah, ThinkSwap's a particular one I hate. As I said, Course Hero causes me a lot of grief. And these sites, ThinkSwap unfortunately started in Australia, but if you go onto their website, it's thinkswap.com, they've got sites in Canada, India, Malaysia, New Zealand, Singapore, South Africa and the UK, and New Zealand also has legislation as well. So it's a deterrent. Where it's going to go, we need to see. It's just, I suppose, unfortunate that it sort of happened around the same time that COVID did, so how it's all going to play out over time. But getting the legislation through was a huge first step. So, yeah, and Jesus said, those who are determined to cheat somehow will find a way. Yeah, they will. But it's like the amount of time they spend trying to cheat, they could have written the assignment. That's the bit that really bugs me. It's like you're really putting your money in the wrong place. And that's where the research around why the marketing, why do you believe this marketing? Why do you believe that this is actually going to make things easier for yourself? It's just like, oh, anyway. But a roundabout answer to the question, but.
Oh, thank you, Anne, for all this clarification. It seems that if we have the legislation, then we will be able to develop much better policies, stronger policies. Otherwise, some issues may not be covered by the policy because they have no consequences by law. So policies are not stronger than law. So first, we need the law, and then we can develop much better policies, I guess so. And here is another contribution from Kubilay, and he's asking for how much time we need to allocate for promoting academic integrity in the curriculum. A week, a month, or anything else? Before I leave it to you, my experience is as much as possible. I mean, we can take some opportunities, for example, to provide more awareness, such as Global Contract Cheating Day organized by International Center for Academic Integrity, for example. We can take this opportunity as an extensive exposure to our students for academic integrity. However, to my experience, throughout the semester, not as a single module or not in a single week, but throughout the semester, we should continue dealing with this issue in a few minutes in our courses. What do you think, Michael and Anne, about it? How do you approach it in your own classes?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Salim. It isn't something that can be done at the beginning of a course or at the end of a course. It has to be embedded within the curriculum. And Anne will no doubt say this is a pedagogical must. One of the things we've been concerned about, certainly in the UK, is the transition into higher education from those from schools and FE colleges, particularly where they've been impacted by COVID as well. Different way of learning in higher education as opposed to in a school environment. So that transition period is crucial. So we set in play, certainly within our department, a 9-week course around independent learning, what it means to become an independent learner. And a session on that was in relation to academic integrity, another session on referencing. So we really made a big play throughout the first term of having these additional timetabled sessions so that students were required to attend. They weren't optional. However, timing is also key, and you need to reinforce that at the time of assessment. Just before the assessment, you need to refresh students' knowledge of the academic integrity requirements of the particular program or institution, so that it's fresh in their mind when they're taking the assessment as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael.
I totally agree. It's embedded, it's throughout, it's taking those opportunities, discussing it in relation to an assessment task. The thing is, we touch on a lot of things when people make that transition into a university or into another educational institution. Reinforcement doesn't hurt if you have it in a number of different ways. But I explain it in relation to the assessment task and what the expectations are. But also putting those reality checks in there. I like having discussions with students about it and also about the software and why we do these sort of things. And I make out, the thing is, like, I've done degrees around university. My work had to go through Turnitin. Like, I'm no different to, I'm not treated any differently. I have the same expectations on me. And the same as I introduce them to things such as Retraction Watch. Now, if you've never been onto Retraction Watch, that is a fascinating site that outs academics who have not been legitimate in their practice. and saying that integrity applies to us as well. It's not just a student thing, it is a societal thing. It is about acknowledging sources and expertise, but it's also not about manipulating things or misrepresenting things. And I cite things like accounting falls under my one of my areas of responsibility. And I said, well, would you like your company books to be done by someone who cheated their way through an accounting degree? Do you want to drive over a bridge designed by an engineer who didn't complete their degree, or go to see a doctor who cheated their way through a degree and the assignment they cheated on is the particular disease that you have and you get misdiagnosed? You don't want those things to happen. So, we've got a responsibility. We want people to earn what they study, and it's about having those conversations in context, in relevance to the subject, but also in relevance to the assignment. So I don't put a time limit on it. I just take those opportunities when they're there. I taught last year a PhD class. I teach literature review, and I actually show them the difference between a predatory journal and a real journal, so that they can see the difference. And I said, I'm not going to stop predatory journals existing. I'd like to, but I'm not going to do it. But you need to understand what they look like and how they work. So that was introducing a different level of integrity into a different type of class. So it's taking those opportunities when they're there and discussing them, not thinking about it as a time limit, but just, latch onto it something, but also invite questions, because I find a lot of students have questions about it, but they're scared to ask. So I like to have that safe environment where we can actually have that open discussion. And I think some people find it quite refreshing.
Thank you, Anne. It seems that we have consensus on this. I am afraid if we focus on academic integrity or limit academic integrity within a week, for example, then it will turn into simply declarative knowledge. However, we want our students to become autonomous learners, to be self-dependent on their learning. Therefore, this will require some development of conditional knowledge and procedural knowledge, which means that they need to know how to act. For example, you said, and avoid predatory journals. So throughout the semester, when they were searching for the relevant literature, they will realize some articles that are coming from predatory journals, and depending on the conditional knowledge, they will be able to eliminate this journal, for example, being involved in their references. So this is quite important to blend it throughout the semester and encourage students' involvement within these activities. Thank you. Okay, before we leave, I'd like to take a few minutes, please, if you don't mind. This is the final week of this course, so before we say goodbye to each other, I'd like to acknowledge the contributions of some people to this course. So I'd like to take this opportunity to mention them here, if you don't mind, please. I'd like to start with the list of our honorary guests. So far, including Anne and Michael, we have welcomed 18 scholars from 11 different countries all over the world. So this is an amazing contribution to our course. Anne and Michael and the other honorary guests, you made an amazing contribution to our understanding. Our students had the opportunity of meeting legends of academic integrity, champions of academic integrity here in this course. So it was a great pleasure to meet you all here. So, on behalf of these 18 scholars, I'd like to thank you once again for all your contribution. It was so important, and it means a lot to us. Thank you. Now I'd like to move to, in the second group, mentors for research projects. I have 4 students taking this course and another student, another PhD candidate working on academic integrity, and Thomas, Irene, Shiva, Zinat, and Inga. They are mentoring my students as co-authors in their research projects. So this is another contribution, another valuable contribution from these scholars. I'd like to also thank these 5 scholars, these 5 colleagues. And special thanks goes to my PhD students. This is a new course. I start this year, Academic Integrity Policies course, and these 4 courageous students, they enrolled in this new course without knowing what was expected from them. So for every week, I delivered several reading list of hundreds of pages reading list, and they were supposed to be reading them before coming to classes here. So I'd like to thank my PhD students who enrolled in this class as well. Also, I received great contribution, great support from 2 of my colleagues, Professor Ece Zehir Topkaya and Associate Professor Mehmet Sercan Ustosun. They attended some of the lectures here on Teams with us. I'd like to thank them. And I'd like to thank to people, some of whom I don't know personally. We have several audience from YouTube. We have followers that are following us from Facebook and Twitter. And I'd like to specifically thank to Academic Integrity Turkey on Twitter because they promoted all our sessions on their Twitter account. They are working anonymously, so I don't know who they are, but anyway, it seems that they are contributing in a good manner to the promotion of academic integrity, so they deserve a special thank. And finally, the last but not the least, my special thanks for Özgür Çelik, my PhD supervisor. He agreed to act as the YouTube moderator. He is not enrolled in this class, however, he is just doing this because he likes to be involved in academic integrity. So throughout the semester, he attended all lessons, all lectures. He agreed to act as the YouTube moderator, and he designed all lovely posters for our guest speakers. Without his support, I wouldn't have done this achievement. So I'd like to thank Özgür for all his contributions. And these are my final remarks. Of course, I'd like to welcome you to contribute if you have any further comments, please.
Thank you very much, Salim, and thank you, Anne. It's been a fascinating, I have to say, 2.5 hours talking about this particular subject. Like Anne, obviously, something very close to my heart. It is, as you say, Salim, extremely important, and Anne has reinforced this, that the graduates, we as institutions basically hold out to the world and to society and to the public. It's extremely important that we do so in a way that the public and everybody else has, I suppose, confidence in those students and their abilities. And, it's part of a global network that we're talking here, which, again, I really enjoy being part of. So thank you very much, Salim, for the opportunity.
Thank you for your contribution, Michael. It was a great contribution in terms of understanding the legislation and what you are doing at your quality agency in terms of preparing lecturers and students for this new environment. Thank you.
I'd also like to agree. It's been a great experience and really a wonderful opportunity. As Michael said, it's a really fabulous network. The people who are interested in academic integrity worldwide, you should see us when we do have the privilege of getting together in person. Fascinating conversations about sharing what we find people do. But it's also very collaborative, positive collaborative network where we realise that it's bigger than any one of us or any one country, and it's only through combined efforts and the legitimate and acknowledged sharing of knowledge that we're actually going to make a difference with this. And united, we can create a lot greater impact than we can by ourselves. So thank you again. It's been great. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And it was an amazing session, amazing final session with you and Michael. So we learned a lot, and it was a great opportunity for the others to see that they are not alone. We are experiencing problems. However, these are common problems, and we know that we have solutions to these problems. All we need is support and collaboration, cooperation with each other. Hopefully, we will be able to solve our problems. So I see Hatice and Miranda, they want to contribute. Yes, please.
Hocam, I would like to start thanking you, actually. To be honest, I was not very willing at the beginning to take this course. It was Dinçay Hoca who advised me to do so. Now I'm in great gratitude of him, because I didn't know, as you have mentioned, I didn't know what to expect from this course. It was just something I thought that it was like the, old classic ethics classes. So I want to thank you. I cannot thank you enough, really, because you have provided us with a new window to academia, and I am really, really willing and interested to continue working in the area. And you have provided us with the great opportunity to meet great people, and you also provide us with the opportunity to work with some of these people. And my final word again will be, I'll say it again, I cannot thank you enough. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your eagerness for the promotion of academic integrity. So even one person is important because one person may promote academic integrity to 10 other person. So these 10 other people will be promoting it to the others. So this is how we can promote academic integrity. Thank you, Hatice. Miranda? Miranda, we cannot hear you. Okay.
Okay, I'm making this a habit. So thank you again, dear professor, and thank you everyone who was involved in delivering this invaluable knowledge to us. What made it so special was that it was interdisciplinary and international, and everyone was willing to share their knowledge with us. And now, actually, we're leaving with a responsibility on our shoulders, because we need to disseminate this knowledge. And I was thinking, I had a webinar scheduled for March, and the topic is determined. It's independent learning strategies. And I know precisely what I'm going to embed in that webinar. My presentation was ready, but I'm going to tweak it in that way so that I embed all these bits and bobs that are very, very important for independent learning strategies in this context. This is a very challenging time we're going through, and we are both students and educators, and I think this is what makes it so special. This course made it so special, and for me, it was the final PhD course, and to be honest, it feels like being in a crowning ceremony.
Okay, Miranda, from now on, you and your friends, you are ambassadors of academic integrity, and you owe me and you owe all the other colleagues, international colleagues who attended our classes as honorary guests. You need to promote academic integrity. So this our expectation from you. Thank you. Kubilay?
Yes, Professor. So, and Miranda Hocam and Hatice Hocam, they told everything that I was going to say. Actually, I totally agree with them. And I also feel very lucky and privileged to have this lesson, okay? And it taught me a lot in this in this course. And as Miranda said, yes, we are the ambassadors, and I feel like I have a lot to do from now on. So, and thank you, and especially I thank you, Professor. So you're leading the way for us, and thanks for your effort and all you have done so far.
We cannot do this with individual efforts. We need cooperation. That is the key point. If we are alone, we cannot succeed. We need cooperation. That's why we are coming together here. And I'd like to thank you all for being here. Hope to meet with some other occasions. As you know, our university and Higher Education Council has approved the establishment of Center for Academic Integrity for our university. And within 2 weeks, we are planning an opening conference. And in this opening conference, we will have several sessions. And once I fix the program, I'm going to announce it on social media and invite you to attend the sessions if you are available, please. Since then, please take good care during these Corona times and protect yourself, stay healthy. I'd like to thank you all. Say you goodbye.
Have a nice day. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again.